The Holy Gospel according to John.
Glory to you, O Lord.
As Jesus walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind, so that God's works might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva and spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. Then he went and washed and came back able to see. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Some were saying, "It is he." Others were saying, "No, but it is someone like him." He kept saying, "I am the man." But they kept asking him, "Then how were your eyes opened?" He answered, "The man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' Then I went and washed and received my sight." They said to him, "Where is he?" He said, "I do not know." They brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also began to ask him how he had received his sight. He said to them, "I put mud on my eyes, then I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not observe the Sabbath." But others said, "How can a man who is a sinner perform such signs?" And they were divided. So they said again to the blind man, "What do you say about him? It was your eyes he opened." He said, "He is a prophet." The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked them, "Is this your son who you say was born blind? How then does he see?" His parents answered, "We know that this is our son and that he was born blind, but we do not know how it is that now he sees, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He is of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, "He is of age. Ask him." So for the second time, they called the man who had been blind, and they said to him, "Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner." He answered, "I do not know whether he is a sinner. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see." They said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" Then they reviled him, saying, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from." The man answered, "Here is an astonishing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does listen to one who worships him and obeys his will. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered him, "You were born entirely in sins, and are you trying to teach us?" And they drove him out. Jesus heard that they had driven him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, "And who is he, sir? Tell me, so that I may believe in him." Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." He said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. Jesus said, "I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees near him heard this and said to him, "Surely we are not blind, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that you say we see, your sin remains." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
I invite you to be seated. We're going to start a little bit different, so if you know the song, join in. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. Well, I love that song, right? It's a classic, and it feels particularly relevant this week. Not only is it in tune with the theme in our reading, the man born blind being able to see, but I've also been thinking about what we have been seeing, what we've been blind to, what we've been choosing to see or not see, and why. It struck me that the man born blind started as the only one in the story who was unable to see physically, yet in the end has the best vision of all. The others who have had their physical vision all their lives were blind. According to Jesus, they couldn't see a thing. So what's going on here? Well, seeing in this story is more than just a physical ability. It is recognizing who Jesus is, what he's about, and what he's up to. To see that is to see amazing grace. But that's not what most of the people in our story are seeing. Instead, I think they're preoccupied with the sign itself, unwilling to see beyond it to what it says about Jesus. They're more concerned with the mechanics and logistics and the threat to their power than about the man born blind himself. In fact, instead of rejoicing at the news of his healing, they're suspicious, fearful even. It isn't about him. It's about them. Fear turns them in on themselves when love for the man born blind could have allowed them to see the miracle and therefore the divine man, Jesus, standing right in front of them. I imagine the Pharisees are afraid because this whole thing is messing with their belief system. Jesus is clearly a sinner because he healed on the Sabbath, which is prohibited by the law. But if he's a sinner, he shouldn't have been able to heal the man in the first place. It doesn't make any sense. Plus, Jesus rejects the belief that sin was the reason the man was born blind. If he wasn't blind because of something he did or didn't do, or his parents did or didn't do, if it wasn't within his control to help himself or heal himself or avoid blindness in the first place, then that meant that anyone could become sick or could be blind or any number of things, even if they lived a perfect, sin-free life. If they couldn't control their lives and what happened by how good they were, well, then what? That's a scary thing to consider, and an even scarier thing to realize that it's true. So instead of celebrating with their neighbor, they're afraid. The man's parents aren't much better. They're afraid of being put out of the synagogue, which meant separation from their entire social, religious, and communal life. Now, some of us can probably relate to that right now, and the fear and difficulties that come with it. Rejection is scary. No longer being welcome in your beloved community is scary. Being separated is scary. Fear made it such that they couldn't see the healing for what it was, or Christ for who he was. They couldn't see through their fear enough to celebrate this miracle of sight. Now, it seems to me that these are all understandable fears. If we're honest with ourselves, I don't think we can blame them for being afraid. But fear is blinding. It makes us suspicious of things that are new or different, suspicious of others, of things we can't control, and it causes us to turn inward. It blinds us to God's goodness and all that God is up to. It blinds us to the needs of others, the experiences of others, and it keeps us from witnessing to things like hope and love. The only one to witness faithfully to what happened was the man born blind. Even though it meant that he was driven out, he was also the only one who came to know and understand Jesus' presence and heard the voice of this good shepherd. The Pharisees, meanwhile, instead of witnessing, pointed fingers and argued. and the parents abandoned their son to the authorities. To fear is to try to save ourselves. To see is to recognize what God is doing, a very old thing, offering salvation in life in a new way through Jesus. To see this, though, we have to take off our lens of fear. Tough stuff, because even though we are created in the image of a God of love, and even though we are gifted with the Holy Spirit, we still tend to look out for ourselves. After all, fear was and still sometimes feels like a matter of survival. So to see beyond and despite our fear usually requires making a choice to love over fear. It might help to ask ourselves, are we reacting and acting out of fear or out of faith, hope, and love? When we do make these choices and look beyond our fear, we recognize God's love at work, and we can better become participants in it. After all, in my experience, fear doesn't keep the bad things from happening. But it does steal away and make us blind to the joy and the gratitude that reside alongside the fear. Of course, participating in God's love in a time of fear is also challenging. Maybe what's being revealed in this strange new reality of ours is what has always been, but our preoccupation and routines have actually obscured it. Maybe what we're learning, or more accurately being reminded of, is that unselfish love, the kind of love God invites us into, is often inconvenient, uncomfortable, and sometimes hard to abide in. And it's essential, always, not just during a pandemic, because we're always interconnected and interdependent. The choices we make have consequences for others, for worse and for better. How have you seen this in the last few weeks? Here are some of the better things I've seen or heard from many of you and others. You're calling your friends, neighbors, and church family. You're offering to help in whatever way you can. Even in this time of uncertainty, if you're able, you're mailing in your offering or making the effort to give online. The app next door has a help map where people can put in ways they're willing to help. There have been posts about eating toilet paper, right? Or help with groceries that have been generously answered. And our healthcare workers, God bless them, are putting themselves in harm's way day after day to care for others. People who have the means are donating money to organizations helping those suddenly unemployed. You're respecting the recommendations and restrictions, and by so doing, you are taking care of God's beloved children and creation, including yourselves. In places around the world, the air and waters are clearer than they've been in decades. Now, don't get me wrong. There are a lot of reasons to be afraid during this time. I don't have to detail all of that for you right now, right? This thing has a lot of ripple effects for, I would guess, every single one of us. But there are also so many reasons to rejoice and to have hope, if only we have eyes to see and ears to hear the call and the work of our Good Shepherd in us and in others. And I truly believe the fears and the dangers of this world don't get the final say over what is in our hearts, our minds, and our spirits. That's where God has chosen to dwell, filling us with faith, hope, and love. So what are you seeing? What are you afraid of? What's obscuring your sight? With a little bit of dirt and holy spit, God opens our eyes to see that love, not fear, has the final word in our lives, and calls us to live as though we believe this is true, that we might say, along with the man born blind, Lord, I believe. Won't you join me? 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the